The world was watching. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, and the Grand Hall of the United Nations Global Security Summit in Geneva filled with the weight of power. Every seat was marked with a polished gold nameplate, each one representing a nation, a story, a burden. One seat drew more attention than the rest: Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. And right beside it, at least that was the plan, the name of Donald J. Trump. But then, something unexpected happened. As Trump entered, his stride faltered. He stopped, looked at the seat next to Traoré, shook his head, and whispered to an aide. Within moments, a staffer rushed forward, snatched Trump's nameplate, and placed it far across the room. The shuffle was subtle, but the message was loud. Gasps echoed. Cameras zoomed. The air grew heavy. Everyone could feel it. Trump didn't want to sit beside Traoré, yet Captain Traoré remained still, calm, unmoved. A journalist live tweeted, "Trump refuses to sit next to Burkina Faso's leader. Is this humiliation, or is he afraid?" The room held its breath. Traoré sat down, alone, his gaze fixed firmly on Trump across the hall. The silence was sharp, like glass ready to shatter. And then, without warning, he leaned toward the microphone. The summit hadn't officially begun. The moderator hadn't spoken. But somehow everyone knew to listen. "I am here," Traoré said slowly, his voice steady and low. "Not to make enemies, but to tell the truth." The press leaned in. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera all went live. "If a man refuses to sit near you," he continued, "ask yourself, what truth does he fear?" The words landed like a thunderclap. Trump's jaw tightened. He whispered again to his aide, but Traoré's eyes didn't move. Then came the blow that shook the room. "My people," he said, "do not eat speeches. They eat rice. They drink clean water. They sleep in peace. I did not come here for politics. I came here for life, not a shout, not a roar, just simple truth, spoken with dignity. And it cut deeper than anger ever could. Across the hall, diplomats from Mali, Niger, even Europe, nodded quietly. Some delegates fought tears. Outside the cameras, you could feel the weight of centuries pressing against those words. Within 2 hours, the clip spread to 37 million screens around the world. And then something happened no agenda had prepared for. A woman stood from the European delegation. Silver hair, French accent, 30 years of diplomacy etched into her voice. She didn't wait for a microphone. "In all my years," she said, trembling, "I have never seen anyone speak in this hall with such truth, without anger, without fear. Captain, you remind me of Lumumba, of Sankara. You speak for Africa, but somehow you speak for us all." The room froze. Traoré didn't flinch. He simply bowed his head in thanks. Across the hall, Trump folded his arms, jaw locked tight. The moderator cleared his throat, desperate to drag the summit back to climate, oil, and policy. But the summit was no longer about policy. It was about presence. It was about dignity. And in that moment, a young leader from a small West African nation had shifted the entire balance of the room, with nothing but words. But the story didn't end inside those walls. Outside, a protest was swelling. Hundreds gathered at the glass entrance of the UN, holding hand-painted signs, "Dignity for Africa." "Stand with Traoré. Let truth speak." They weren't all Burkina. There were students from Paris, doctors from Ghana, exiled, journalists, even retired US veterans holding peace signs. One woman clutched a photo of her son, killed in a drone strike years ago. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "He wanted a school, not a war." Inside, Captain Traoré lowered his eyes for a moment. He carried memories no camera could capture. Children sick from poisoned water, mothers stretching, one yam to feed 3 mouths. And still, across the hall, Trump sat rigid, arms crossed, pretending the crowd outside meant nothing. But it meant everything. The pressure in the hall was mounting. For the first time in decades, the voice of a small, overlooked country had shaken the gates of global power. Inside, the silence was thick. Everyone knew someone had to respond. But the voice that came next wasn't from a president, nor from a polished diplomat. It was a boy. A trembling hand rose in the middle of the hall. The moderator frowned. "You're not on the list." The boy stood anyway, brown skin, nervous eyes, a small badge around his neck. UN Youth Observer. "I don't need to be on a list," he whispered. "I just need 5 seconds." The camera zoomed in. The hall leaned forward. "My name is Kofi," he said, turning to face Captain Traoré. "I was born in a refugee camp in Niger. Watched my father die waiting for medicine that never came. But last year, I heard about a young captain who took back the gold from the West and gave it to his people." His voice cracked. Tears filled his eyes. "You inspired me to study leadership. Today, I skipped school just to be here, just to see you." The room broke. Hardened diplomats swallowed hard. Eyes glistened. Even those who had come only to debate oil and contracts felt their throats tighten. Captain Traoré rose slowly. He didn't speak. He simply walked to the boy, placed a steady hand on his shoulder, and nodded. That single gesture carried more weight than 100 speeches. And then, the moment everyone had been waiting for. Donald Trump pressed his microphone forward. The room braced. Would he finally explain why he refused to sit next to Traoré? Would he defend himself? He tapped the mic once. His face was stiff, controlled, but instead of speaking, he pushed his chair back, straightened his suit, and walked out. Gasps erupted. "He's leaving," one delegate whispered. "He's walking away from the conversation." The cameras followed every step as Trump exited, ignoring the reporters calling his name. Traoré stayed silent, unmoved, dignified. Then he leaned forward, his voice calm and measured. "When silence becomes a weapon of power, we must answer with truth, not rage." The hall exploded in applause. But beneath his composure, Traoré carried a deeper weight. He wasn't angry. He was tired. Tired of being treated like a guest in rooms where his people had earned their place. Tired of seeing Africa mocked while its children went hungry. And yet, tonight, the world was watching him. He thought of Ouagadougou's dusty streets, of children playing beside broken wells, of mothers praying for one safe night. He remembered the farmer who lost his land to greed, the student forced to leave school to feed her siblings, the old man who watched his grandchildren walk away with no hope of return. This was no longer about politics. It was about dignity. Traoré clenched his hands quietly, whispering a promise only he could hear. Never forget, never bow, always fight. Then, from the far corner, another voice rose. A young delegate from Canada, barely 28, stood tall. She wasn't on the program either. "I must speak," she said firmly, her voice trembling. "I come from privilege, but my heart aches for those left behind, for the people Captain Traoré represents." The room fell silent again. "You remind us that leadership isn't power. It's sacrifice." Her eyes glistened as she continued. "My grandmother was a survivor of war. She taught me that courage is louder than guns. And tonight, I see that courage in you. Captain, I believe in your vision, and I stand with you." Her words hung in the air like a prayer. Traoré's expression softened. He nodded once more. And in that simple nod, the world felt a shift. A reminder that leadership was not measured in wealth, or armies, or titles, but in the willingness to carry the weight of others. For a brief moment, the divide seemed to fade. Politics, prejudice, even pride. All of it fell quiet under something larger, a shared sense of humanity. Even Trump, sitting off to the side, shifted uneasily in his chair. The summit was no longer the controlled performance anyone had expected. Outside, the chants swelled louder, echoing through the glass walls. Justice. 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 And then, the moment came. Captain Ibrahim, Traoré's name was called. He would be the final speaker. He rose slowly, steadying himself beneath the bright lights. The hall fell into silence. Every lens, every microphone, every beating heart turned toward him. "My people taught me this," he began, his voice low but commanding. "Dignity is not given. It is earned." The words cut through the silence. When those in power refuse to sit beside us, it is not because they fear us. It is because they refuse to see us as equals. Across the room, faces stiffened, eyes welled. No one looked away. "I do not stand here to beg for approval," he continued, steady and unflinching. "I stand here to demand justice, not only for Burkina Faso, but for every nation whose voice has been silenced." For a heartbeat, the room was frozen. Then, from the front row, a woman stood and began to clap. Another followed, and then another. Within seconds, the entire hall was on its feet, thundering applause for a leader who hadn't raised his voice, but who had broken through the ice with nothing but truth. As the ovation faded, the tension returned. The weight in the room pressed heavy again. Traoré adjusted his jacket, his gaze sweeping across the hall. Every camera stayed locked on him. "When a leader refuses to sit beside you," he said, voice firm, "it is more than a refusal of space. It is a refusal of respect. But I do not seek respect from those who have never respected my people." The words carried the pain of generations. In Burkina Faso, children walk miles for water. Mothers bury their dreams with their children. We live every day with the consequences of neglect, of greed. The hall grew still. You could hear breaths trembling in the microphones. "But I am not angry," Traoré continued. His voice softened, almost tender. "I am hopeful. Because even in silence, I see the strength of my people. I see the power of truth." He paused. And then, quietly, as a single tear slipped down his face, he said, "We will not be ignored any longer." The cameras caught it. The tear, the calm, the dignity. And in that moment, the internet erupted. Hashtags like "Stand with Traoré" and "Dignity for Africa" shot across the world in minutes. Delegates whispered. Phones buzzed. Social media overflowed with clips of a leader who had turned humiliation into history. Trump's face flickered on the screen. Was it regret? Frustration? No one knew. But what was clear was this. The young captain had transformed the summit. He had created a rebellion of silence, not fought with fists, but with courage, restraint, and truth. Outside, the chants grew even louder. Inside, hearts shifted. The summit was no longer about oil or contracts. It was about justice. And then came the surprise. An announcement of a press conference to begin immediately after the summit. The hall buzzed with anticipation. Cameras scrambled into position. When Traoré appeared again before the world, there was no anger in his face, no defiance in his tone. Instead, there was something rarer, a gentle, humble smile. "I do not stand here to divide," he said softly, speaking to the crowd and the millions watching online. "I stand here to unite, to remind us all that true leadership is service. Service to every child who deserves a future." The world held its breath. Even the skeptics watching at home felt it. A deep, undeniable stirring of hope. Because sometimes the greatest revolutions do not begin with weapons. They begin with words. And Captain Ibrahim Traoré's words were already echoing far beyond Geneva, carried from the dusty streets of Ouagadougou to the shining towers of New York. For once, the world wasn't just watching, it was listening. The world began to see Captain Ibrahim Traoré in a new light, not just as the young president of a small nation, but as something larger, a symbol of hope. He wasn't perfect. That was exactly why people connected with him. His humility, his calm strength, and his refusal to play the usual games of politics made many believe that the impossible might just be within reach. Every retweet, every clip shared online added fuel to a fire that was spreading far beyond. Burkina Faso. It wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about something deeper. About dignity, about justice, about the right of ordinary people to be seen, heard, and respected. In Europe, students marched with cardboard signs. In Africa, market women discussed his speech between baskets of fruit. In New York and São Paulo, strangers in cafes replayed the clip, nodding in quiet respect. And behind all of this, one truth echoed. The tension of that summit was no longer about geography or power. It was about all of us, a universal fight for dignity. That night, away from the bright lights, Traoré found a quiet corner. Through the window, the city lights of Geneva sparkled, cold and distant. A young aide approached, hesitant. "Captain," she whispered, "the world is watching. They're inspired. But there are those who want this moment silenced." Traoré kept his eyes on the glass, his voice calm. "This is only the beginning," he said softly. "Truth has a way of breaking walls, but the path is never easy." Memories flashed, friends lost in the struggle, sleepless nights spent wondering if the fight was worth it. And then the faces of children back home, barefoot, hungry, yet still smiling with eyes full of hope. His hand clenched into a fist. "For them," he thought, "for them, I will keep speaking." That night, in the stillness, he renewed his vow. Not to bow, not to break, to keep standing, always. By morning, the world had erupted. Headlines blazed across every continent. Traoré's triumph, when silence spoke louder than words. Commentators debated, some mocked, some dismissed. But the majority felt something rare, a stirring in their hearts. Teachers replayed the video in classrooms, turning it into a lesson about courage. In cafes, strangers leaned over tables, discussing the meaning of respect. Across continents, protests and vigils grew, not against Traoré, but for the dignity he embodied. This was no longer just a story about two men, or about who sat beside whom at a summit. It was about us, all of us. It was a story about standing tall when the world tries to push you down, about refusing to accept silence as your place. And soon, the question was no longer, what did Traoré say? The question was, what will we say when it's our turn?